The hardest part was like being sold something that I believed was gonna help me and make me feel better, only to do all of it, and come out on the other side not feeling any better. I can't ever undo it. I could have always waited, but I can't undo it now that I did it. I began transitioning at 12 years old. 12 years old when I started Lupron and testosterone, and it was only a month after my 13th birthday that I had a double mastectomy. I was in a place when I made those decisions where I did not have my comorbidities under control. And that just shouldn't be how it is when you make these types of decisions. There's just a lot that goes into making such life-changing choices that it's almost under duress when you have all these comorbidities stacked up in these issues. I came across Chloe Cole's case one night while trying to research and Google where my doctors are now and if they're still practicing. And I saw the active sue letter in her lawsuit. I am actively suing Kaiser Permanente, and I'm suing the doctors that gave me those treatments related to my transition. My name is Layla Jane. I'm 18 years old, and I am a woman who has detransitioned.
It's been a while. The last time I saw you was, I think it was the rally, right?
Yeah, it was.
You did amazingly, by the way.
I appreciate that.
It was your first live speech, right?
Yeah, and I didn't plan at all.
I think it's pretty good for something impromptu.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, but I really appreciate you coming out to do this interview today.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me the space.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, your story really hits close to home because I think you're one of the youngest detransitioners other than myself that I know of, and you actually started transitioning a year earlier than I did, and 2 years before I got my mastectomy. You were 12 when you started testosterone blockers, right?
Yeah.
Were you on blockers?
Initially, yeah, they started me on Lupron, and then they put me on testosterone.
I mean, it's kind of comforting knowing, like, I'm not the only kid in this situation. But on the other hand, it's quite terrifying at the same time because I hate knowing that there's another person out there who's been through exactly what I have, even younger than I was. Like, I hear, like, you got your mastectomy at 13, just a few years after you started puberty. And that makes me upset personally. How do you feel about that? What's it like dealing with that?
It's very conflicting, but honestly, I'm very upset that it was done to me so young, and also, not to mention, in a headspace where I just shouldn't have been able to make those kind of decisions.
Right. I mean, I remember being 13, being in the office with the endocrinologist, and she was telling me about how I might experience things like vaginal atrophy when I hadn't even been sexually active yet, and that I might lose like my reproductive functions and my ability to have kids as an adult. But that didn't mean anything to me as a kid because I was a child. Why would I be thinking about that? Like, I'm 13 years old. I'm thinking about schoolwork and fitting in. And I didn't even know what things like. Did you know what things like ovulation or like a cervix or fallopian tubes were yet?
Not like in depth, no.
Yeah, did you know? I didn't know at that time that there were 4 stages to the menstrual cycle yet. All I knew was there was a period.
You know, I actually had never seen like a diagram of like a breast and like the organ and like the lactation like organs, like the glands and all that, until really recently. I saw on Twitter, I saw a diagram, you know. They never showed anything like that to me. They just, you know, and they really watered it down and just called it top surgery, not a radical.
Not a double mastectomy.
Double mastectomy, what it was, right? They just put it in a lot more palatable terms.
What kind of incision did you get? Did you get a double incision with the grafts?
Yes.
So have you? I mean, what was that like? Like what? Like before you went in, And while they were describing it, how did you feel?
I don't think I really grasped like the full extent of this really at the time. I was just like, all right, let's do it.
You just thought of it as part of the process, right?
Right, and I thought, I'll do this and I'll stop feeling this way. I'll stop having these issues with my body, and it just never went away.
It's really presented so matter of fact. It's like you have this condition called gender dysphoria, and your feelings are completely valid. It's indicative of reality, and it's the only means of treating this condition. I would imagine during the consultation process, I mean, they didn't really give me or my parents any other option. Did they tell you like that you could choose not to transition?
No, they really didn't tell me that like I might grow out of it, or like they didn't tell me about like desistance rates or anything like that. If anything, they pushed that if I'm not allowed to do this, I'm gonna like my chance of committing suicide is higher. That's really kind of.
So they told you that.
They more said to my parents. And I think my parents had worries too, and they really didn't refute or comfort my parents at all. They just kind of let my parents.
Yeah, they really zero in on your parents, telling them things like, "Oh, your kid, if you don't let her make this decision, like, there's no other option. Like, she's going." They don't say outright that you're going to kill yourself, right? They just imply that that's going to be the end outcome if you don't go through this. That's what they did with my parents. I don't think I was even in the room when they told my mom and dad that. Were you?
I don't think I was. Because I know they definitely had parts of the appointment where I'd be out of the room, and they'd have sections of the appointment where my parents were out of the room. It was just me and the doctor. Yeah.
You see, that's what I don't get, because you think that as the patient, you'd be getting all of the information on this, right?
Right.
You'd be hearing everything that they're saying, and you'd have the choice of either refuting it or affirming it, saying, yes, that's true, that's how I feel. They didn't give you that option during those appointments. I
don't really feel like it. I really feel like they just purely only affirmed, and they didn't like dig deeper into the why of it. It's just that, okay, you feel like you're a boy, let's affirm that. Let's set you on that route. Let's make you comfortable in that, instead of trying to assess the underlying issues and maybe make myself comfortable with my body without such radical measures.
So what was the initial consultation for getting your gender dysphoria diagnosed? Was it done with like a gender specialist, or was it done through like a psychologist, like a general like pediatric psychologist?
Honestly, it's a bit fuzzy, because I saw a lot of like different mental health professionals in those years.
Yeah.
But I do believe it was a gender specialist that did diagnose me.
Was it Dr. Watson?
I know she definitely did give me that diagnosis for sure, but the other doctor that I saw first, the more local one, I can't remember her name, she might have gave me that diagnosis too. I think she did as well.
So, do you remember at all what the appointments for the diagnosis were like? Like whether they went into any possible underlying causes, asked you questions like do you have any other conditions like ADHD or autism, or like any traumas?
Oh no, like they really didn't. Like I had bad anxiety during those years. It was like impeding my ability to function, do school and everything like that. And honestly, it took them a long time. They addressed the transition before they addressed the anxiety. Like, and even really tried to get that under control. So.
I mean, you'd think that they'd see these two conditions and put two and two together, that maybe these are related, that maybe they're not standalone issues, because, I mean, when it comes to mental health and psychology, nothing is really disconnected in the mind.
Right, there's a lot of comorbidities and everything that really need to just be carefully assessed.
Did they go, like, into your childhood at all?
No, really. Not at all.
I mean, what was your childhood like? Like, what was your relationship with your parents and like your family and your peers? Like, do you have like any siblings or extended
No,
family that you're close to?
I was an only child. I
Mm.
really only had like my parents and my grandma. I didn't really have peers or anything like that. I had a lot of trouble actually with other kids growing up, and I tended to mostly just spend time around adults and family. So
So you didn't really have many interactions with your peers.
no, not at all actually.
Were you in public school?
For about like up until middle school, up until I transitioned, and then I kids kind of knew, and the bullying got really bad. They had to put me on homeschool.
So you started identifying as transgender when you were in sixth grade.
Yes,
How old were you? You're like 10 or 11?
11, almost 12.
I mean, what brought you to that point? What was it that made you think that you were dysphoric, that you wanted to transition?
I was just so uncomfortable with my body. I mean, I did go through really precocious puberty. Like started around 9 years old, fourth grade. So I was experiencing these changes like before all my peers too, which I think made it worse.
That's hard.
Yeah, and I think it's just so quickly changing. Like I couldn't handle it, and I was like, I found out that transitioning was an option. I was like,
How did you find out about that, by the way?
well, I kind of always knew about like LGBT people and stuff. Like I grew up seeing like RuPaul's Drag Race and stuff on MTV. But I didn't really know. I knew when Caitlyn Jenner came out. That's the first time I really seen and really thought much about like trans people. It wasn't until later that I found out the other way around. You can female to male, and that caught my interest.
Was it through social media or like
Yes.
your peers?
Yeah, social media.
And how did you find out about it through social media?
I think it was like Instagram, like because that was like a lot more popular, those communities and stuff, and like especially through fandoms. Like I think it started. I was like into anime and stuff, and then I got recommended these communities.
Yeah, it's a weird little pipeline. Like at first, like you'll like be in these communities around like books and anime and manga and
Like video games and yeah.
And then for some reason, like you'll see like a lot of these people in these communities are like people our age identifying as transgender, and they'll make posts about like their personal lives sometimes. Did you find that like the algorithm shifted as you like viewed these posts and you started to see more like specifically just LGBT centered content?
Very likely. I also, though, probably affected the algorithm a bit. But yeah.
I mean, it does show you stuff that you look at and it's like show
Right.
interesting. But were you like directly interacting with anybody in these communities, or just kind of like viewing like what they're saying?
No, I was more just passively viewing. I didn't really have anybody from those communities I was interacting with extensively.
Yeah, I mean, even if like you're not directly talking to anybody, it's still pretty impressionable stuff. Like there is kind of that appeal to kids in that like there's like all these new labels and ways of describing yourself, which are, I think, at our age, like you were like 11 going on 12, you're at an age where you're going through all these changes like in your body and in your mind. Like your consciousness is starting to expand and you're trying to like discover your way in the world, like who you are, like what your role is. So it really does kind of have that appeal to somebody that age. And you're still fairly young. And these communities, I think a lot of it is presented in kind of like a really infantile way with like lots of art, like lots of bright colors and like all these bright flags. And so it seems like everything, it's such a cheery experience. It's so happy. Like it's like self-discovery. And you're finding what's making you your best self. Do you feel that's how it was presented?
Definitely. I could see that being a big reason, like part of the reason it was so alluring.
Is there anything else that you think made you like really attracted to this idea?
I was scared of growing up and becoming a woman, honestly. 'Cause, you know, being a woman's like not great. Childbirth, periods. Um, Not to mention, I didn't have the strongest female role models ever. I didn't really have a whole lot of women that I looked forward to one day become. And I found out I could turn into a man. I can escape that.
Right.
I clung to it.
I mean, growing up, like I would always hear about all these tough things, all the pain that being a woman had to offer, but nobody really told me, like, the pain's all worth it. It's all for a reason.
Right.
And there's a gift that comes with all these things, even if you don't want to become a mother or like raise your own family one day. Like, it's a gift to be able to create life using nothing but your own body. Had nobody ever really told you that before?
I never heard that. I just only grew up hearing all the terrible parts.
And I mean, it was probably tough dealing with all the expectations as you got older.
Right, that's another thing too, like especially growing up in, you know, the era of social media and Instagram and everything. That at the time, like, you know, it was in to have a thigh gap and, you know, like all the expectations, and I think that's also something that I wanted to escape. It's like,
Do you have some
I'm not
body
gonna
image
play this
issues?
game. Huh?
Body image issues?
Definitely. Can't play this body image game if I'm not a woman and held to female standards.
Yeah, that's kind of what part of it was for me. But I also had an early sort of precocious puberty, like on the cusp of being precocious, and it was really difficult, like having to deal with how like everybody around me, from boys to the adults, were seeing me, and like knowing like that there's like parts of my bodies like that they're looking at. Was that scary at all?
Definitely. That was one of a big thing that I was trying to escape.
Did you have any other diagnosis or like any sort of trauma?
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of issues. But I hadn't actually really been like extensively looked at and diagnosed with anything up until I got older. But I had issues, like I saw like a counselor pretty much throughout all my elementary school years, like the school counselor a few times. I had to see Kaiser counselors because it got that bad. But always after a few sessions, they just let me go.
Why was that?
Not really sure. I think also maybe might have been my parents not quite following up. I was just so young at the time. Like I'm talking like 6, 7 years old kind of thing. 8 years old, 9 years old.
I mean, like, did you have like any behavioral issues, like getting along with your peers?
Yeah, I did have some issues. I did end up having a good couple of school suspensions. It was the school that actually recommended and told my mom, like, you have to take your kid in to the psychiatrist.
What would you get suspended for?
Mostly my language. Like I never been in any fights. No physical fights. However, like a lot of times peers would just bug me and antagonize me and stuff. I was kind of always off by myself. I'd finally blow up and just verbally just tell them to go, you know, leave me alone. And then I'd get in trouble for that. They tell me for that. And then the school system come down on me for that instead of the actual what led up to that.
I hope you don't mind me like chuckling or like smiling, because this is
okay.
totally my experience in public school. Like this is almost like
Really?
word for word, except I wouldn't just like, it wasn't just the language that I would use. Like I would actually get into fights with my peers because they would pick on me.
I really tried not to keep it physical because I didn't want to start things, especially if they're not putting their hands on me, but they're just like putting it just microminimally close, but they're not quite touching me kind of thing. It's like, I can't quite hit you. You're not quite touching me, but you're like, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that must have made you feel like there was something that was making you different from your peers, right?
Definitely.
But you couldn't really quite pinpoint what it was.
Right.
What do you think it was?
I still honestly don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out.
I understand that though. I feel like for me, it was probably the fact that, I mean, I haven't gotten a formal diagnosis for it, but I very strongly believe that I'm on the spectrum, and it kind of like affected like my behavior growing up and like just me thinking differently from my peers. Do you think that you might also be autistic?
I'm actually currently getting assessed.
Okay.
I have an appointment soon for a full 4-hour like evaluation. So it's possible.
I hope it goes well.
I appreciate it.
But have you had a screening for that before?
No, they didn't screen me when I was younger, even despite the behavioral issues. I think it was because I didn't struggle academically that it wasn't on their radar.
Right. I remember being a kid and they were telling my parents, like, your daughter's basically not dumb enough to be autistic, which is...
That's not...
It's a really weird bias considering that most high-functioning autistic people are actually more intelligent than average. But... So, you had a history of being bullied and not really fitting in with your peers, and you always felt like you were different from them, and especially the girls. Would you have considered yourself like a tomboy?
Oh, definitely. Like, throughout my whole childhood, I was always playing with, like, Hot Wheels and following my dad out in the garage and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty normal part of growing up for a lot of girls, though.
Right.
Had you ever heard from like your mom or like an older female relative like, oh, I was a tomboy when I was your age?
Yeah, my mom was like a tomboy, but yeah.
But it feels, hearing that, it almost feels like you're being dismissed, especially when you're young, because it's like you see like was your mother like really feminine?
I'd say so.
Yeah. Hearing that from somebody who isn't currently presenting themselves in a masculine way, it kind of feels like they're just saying like, oh, you're gonna grow out of it, or like,
right.
It's still, you must have still felt like even if you were a tomboy that there was something setting you apart from your peers.
Yeah, I definitely felt some kind of way about it, for sure.
And yet none of this during the diagnosis for your gender dysphoria or even the treatment was considered at all.
I think if anything, they're like, this is more reason that this kid is trans
Right.
and needs this.
Did you have that sort of bias and like seeing like how you differed from your peers, how you weren't like the other kids or the other girls? Do you feel like that kind of played a role in your decision?
Definitely.
In what way?
It's really hard to explain, but like, I really didn't feel like I fit in. Like, I didn't feel like one of the girls. I didn't feel like one of the boys. I didn't feel like, I don't know. It's really hard to explain. I'm sorry.
No, I get that. I mean, when you're given this option, without any other explanation for these feelings, it's easy to cling on to this because you don't know any better.
Right.
And I mean, since you were feeling this way, your doctors just accepted it as a fact that you wanted this, that it would be best for you, and that you were in fact a boy. I mean, the moment you stepped in the room, they probably started affirming you right away. What were they asking at first during these consultations?
It's hard to remember because it was just so long ago. Like, but I think they kind of like asked about my issues at school, and they asked like, they really asked like kind of like questions that were kind of more like,
was it more oriented towards your gender than anything? To basically affirm their bias that this is gender dysphoria and that you should get treated for it right away.
Right, and that it's definitely gender dysphoria and it's not just maybe an atypical female or something like that kind of.
And a lot of this is typical.
Right.
It's just, it seems like you were just a kid who was probably on the spectrum, just trying to find your way growing up. And it was perverted into something that it wasn't. Do you feel like you were pushed into transitioning?
I wouldn't say I was pushed into it, really. It was kind of like something that I thought I wanted at the time. But it got to a point where it kind of felt hard to back out. Like, when I started detransition, it was like having to come out all over again. And it was harder than the first time coming out, oddly enough.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, what was the course of your transition like, though? I mean, when after you got diagnosed with the gender dysphoria, what were the consultations like for the blockers and the hormones? And when do you start on them? Was it like very quickly after you got diagnosed?
Yeah, let me try to think dates here. Very quickly, like almost immediately after I got into contact with Dr. Watson, like maybe after the first appointment, I had Lupron, and that was November of 2016. And then I was on that by June of like 2017, early June, I had my first testosterone injection.
Was it? Did you get it from a doctor, or did you administer it yourself?
No, initially I'd go into the allergy clinic and get it done there.
The allergy clinic. That's really interesting.
Yeah, Kaiser, they'll do it at the injection allergy clinic. Yeah. But
I don't think I'll see an allergy clinic the same ever again.
It was, yeah, I know a few times I was there, and I think my mom noticed, she was in the waiting room with me, and she noticed another kid that looked like me a few times and clocked that. It was like, oh, we're here for the same thing.
How does that feel, like seeing another patient, like another kid your age, going through the same thing?
At the time it was affirming and comforting. Like, yeah, I'm not the only one.
Right.
But now it's kind of horrifying. It's like, how many detransitions? Like, because there's just not follow up. They don't keep track of how many of their patients desist. It's just I quit making appointments, and I quit refilling my testosterone. I got to the point I started doing my own injections. Got tired of driving to a clinic. I quit calling. I quit making appointments. I quit picking up my prescription. They didn't really raise a red flag and try to reach out to me. They're just okay, you quit seeking care. Okay.
It's such a careless approach. It's so infuriating. Like, they're the people who got you into the situation in the first place, and now they're just not going to help. Did you get any guidance on like how to go off these treatments?
Oh no, I just kind of cold turkey, basically, the testosterone. I got sick of doing the injections, and it was getting tougher to do it because I had to do them like in my stomach, like subcutaneous, and I had some weight fluctuations in the area that just made it more difficult to do the injection. And I think I mentioned this to my endo a few times, and she didn't really follow up on that or give me any help. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm going off this. Not really enjoying the effects anymore anyway, because I got to the point, it's like, why am I taking this? I'm shaving all of the hair that I'm growing. Really, it was only the energy boost kind of that I was getting.
Do you feel like in a way like you're dependent on it, like emotionally, or like addicted to it?
Oh yeah, well yeah, once I was on for so long, if I missed the injection, or I was late, I definitely felt it. I had like mood swings, like my appetite, my energy levels would fluctuate. It would just irritate my whole body.
I mean, how long were you on these treatments for by that point?
I started treatment when I was 12. November 2016 was when I had my first Lupron injection. By June, I had the following year, 2017. Before my 13th birthday, I had my first testosterone injection. By September of that year, I had the mastectomy, and it was only a month after my 13th birthday.
So like 2 months after you started the testosterone.
About like, I think 3-4 months. I was on it for under 6 months, I'm pretty sure. It wasn't a big timeline. Like, I'm sure usually they try to have you on the hormones for a while before surgical intervention, but...
And they never said anything like that? Like, they didn't say like there was any requirement for the amount of time that you're supposed to be on it before you go on to surgery?
Well, I think the thing is, the requirements and the recommendations didn't matter as much because, you know, Dr. Watson was like the head of the department. So I think she had a bit more leeway.
Yeah, I mean, there were all these regulations at the time by the World Professional,
The W
the
path.
W path. But at least in my experience and seemingly in yours, they went against all these recommendations. Why do you think that is?
I'm really not sure. Maybe because they saw dollar signs, but
That's a big part of
maybe
it for sure.
they really thought it was the thing that would help. Maybe they had good intentions, but just rushed it. I'm really not sure.
I
It's
mean,
like they had good intentions, but for lack of a better word, they're half-assed.
absolutely. I mean, I think that's the only really appropriate word for it, honestly. Because, I mean, whether they had good intentions or not, you can't ever do this to children. I don't think so. Do you think that this is ever appropriate for an appropriate treatment for anybody under the age of 18?
I really don't think, especially as easily as it was handed to me, I feel like I think it should be very few, if any at all, underage. I mean, I couldn't even get a tattoo at that age. And being 18 now, I've done both things. You know, I've gotten a tattoo, I've had the mastectomy. It's so much easier to get a tattoo. And there's like, if I end up hating it, I could cover it, I could laser it. It's not as intensive as full-on breast reconstruction if I'm even a candidate for that. You know, like this, there's so much more that goes into this. It's a big choice to make.
I mean, what did they tell you about the surgery?
Well, they told me I wouldn't be able to chest feed again.
That's the term they used? So they really weren't giving you the full picture of what all this actually means.
Right. And it's like, you know, I'm 13 at the time. I'm not thinking of that too heavily. It's like, oh, if I have a kid, I can just put them on formula, was what I thought. I didn't understand there was like, you know, the brain chemicals, the bonding that goes into that. Nobody told me about any of that at all. Like, they could have just floated it by like, hey, you know, this is a little thing. But that's not something I heard about until recently. I've heard you talking. So...
And I mean, do you feel like if you knew about those things that it might have affected your decision?
With the headspace I was in, I'm really not sure it would.
I understand.
But, because I was genuinely in the headspace that I'm probably not going to be alive to 18. So if I regret these choices, it's not going to affect me.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. You don't have to. But yeah.
I mean, for the testosterone, they told you that you might not be able to have kids, right? Did they go that deep into it?
I don't think they went that deep into it, but I think they did tell me, like, you know, it can affect. And I don't remember what I said, but I think I said I understand that, and I think, like, I think I kind of said, like, look, I know I'm a kid. I'm probably not thinking that deep on this, but I'll have options in the future. And they're like, wow, you're so mature.
But they never talked about, like, what those options were?
Well, I could have had my eggs frozen, but I would have had to go on, like, hormone supplements and had, like, crazy high estrogen, you know, and not to mention it's so expensive. We can't afford that.
Yeah, and I mean, the high estrogen level is exactly what your dysphoric self wouldn't want.
Right. So that really, it's either that or take it, hope for the best. Maybe you'll have to adopt in the future. We don't know, kind of thing.
But how was going through your transition like socially?
Very turbulent. Initially, when I first came across like the whole concept, I did like a social transition in 6th grade, and I insisted on other kids changing name and pronouns they used for me, and some of them did it. Some of them were respectful. Some of them were like intentionally like mean about it, and like intentionally just gross. And
Well, that's just middle school for you.
yeah. But I lost a lot of the few friends I had. I lost them transitioning, so they were one of the more turbulent people towards it or about it.
And I mean, medically transitioning, going on testosterone, going through all the physical changes, like with your appearance and your voice, must have like really expedited your social transition. Did it affect the way that people saw you?
Well, by that time, I was on homeschool. I was pulled out of school, like pretty much like right before I started Lupron.
Huh.
Yeah, because the bullying just got that bad with the social transition.
I mean, what was homeschooling like? Were you in a program that was like you would go to like a campus to like interact with other kids and work on assignments together, or was it just entirely at home, like not really any social interaction with your peers at all?
Kind of switched around throughout the years that I was on it. But for the most part, I was at home. But I did have a while where like maybe like twice a week I'd come in for an hour and like do tests in the same room as other kids, but we didn't really interact. We're just in the same room with the teacher doing our tests under supervision.
I mean, that must have been really lonely though, because even if you were getting your interaction in with like your family and like older people, like you still have to interact with other people your age. Do you think like missing out on that?
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, like I didn't have like a prom, or I didn't even go to my graduation either because I didn't see a point in it. So it does actually make me like kind of sad. I see kids now like posting all about it and having hella people surrounding them.
Yeah, I get that. Do you think that like affected your like that isolation affected like your decision to go on blockers and the other treatments though?
I think so. I think maybe if I had like other female friends, really, that like I think it maybe would have helped me feel more okay with being a girl. Because at that time, like I didn't have any friends that were girls really that weren't like mean to me or like and like because I wouldn't say they fat shamed me, but like it was really catty at that time. The friends that I had, and it was toxic, and it was more reason to I don't want to be a girl.
I mean, middle school's the trenches, honestly.
Yeah, it really
Especially
is.
with girls, they are not nice. But I mean, through most of your school years, you were homeschooled, right?
The second half, yeah.
So like in middle to high school?
Yes.
All of high school?
Briefly, I did. I got kicked out of the homeschool program because I got too depressed to do any of the work, and they're like, "All right, you can't be here. You got to go to the regular public school." And I was there for a few months, but I absolutely hated it. And I ultimately went back and graduated on homeschool.
Was it? I mean, that must have been a difficult adjustment socially.
It definitely was. And also, too, it didn't help that it was kind of at a weird period towards the end of my transition where I was starting to present a bit more femininely and grow out my hair. People were like, but your name is a male name on the attendance. And, but I presented more femininely, and it's like...
What do you mean by that?
Well, I had about shoulder length hair, and I'd wear like crop tops and like some stuff from the women's section that was like kind of more neutral per se. But I was kind of exploring with my expression a bit that way, and I was starting to explore with makeup, stuff like that. So I definitely read more as a girl. I mean, I'm also shorter in stature, you know?
Yeah, so you have that kind of like ambiguous appearance. Which facilities did you use like for restrooms and locker rooms in school during that time?
I didn't really use the restroom at school or any of the facilities, honestly.
Yeah.
I just held it all day. When I was like in middle school and, you know, the transition was more of a hot issue, the teachers did say, you know, we can let you in use the staff bathroom, but I'd have to go ask them for the key and everything, so I didn't do that ever.
It's a lot of work.
Especially, I was already super anxious, and the teacher has like enough workload, 30 other kids that they're concerned about. I didn't want to, you know?
It's that feeling of not wanting to cause any trouble.
Right.
I remember going through that.
Towards that brief stint, though, that I was in public high school, just because nobody really knew me, and I had long hair, I'm short, I used the girls' bathroom a couple times, and it wasn't an issue. Nobody even noticed I was in there.
Did it feel weird, though?
It did. But at the same time, it's like, oh, I did this as a kid at the same time. It's like,
and like if anybody gives you shit, like, you're biologically female.
Right. Like, genitalia-wise, I'm not in the wrong space. You know? Like, it'd be weirder if I went to the men's restroom, especially at this point. Like, yeah.
Did you ever like any weird looks for it, though?
Huh?
Did you ever like any weird looks for it, though? Like, while you were in school?
Not really. Because, you know, especially while it's like actively in my transition as an issue, I just avoided the restrooms. It was actually in middle school, especially this was like 2016, 2017, you know, it was a pretty hot issue, the bathroom issue. Especially like the boys were like, we don't want you in our restroom, you know, it's gross. The girls were like, we don't want you in our restroom either. So I was like, cool, I'll just not pee on campus.
That must have been hard though, like, especially as a kid, like you're smaller, like you have to go more frequently. Did you ever like, that must have like caused you like a UTI at least once, right?
The dots are connecting. I think it definitely wasn't good for me, I'll say that. And
it's not good for anybody.
It's just not comfortable having to do that for 8 hours a day either. Like,
did you bind at all?
I did.
I assume you also did that for about 8 hours a day.
Oh yeah, I really only took it off to shower. That was it. And even then, I barely showered. I avoided showering because of that.
You were so dysphoric. You were so distressed about your body that you just didn't want to see it.
I didn't want others to see it either, too. That just made me uncomfortable. Yeah.
Did you wear it in your sleep? Would you like wear it while working out, or?
Yep.
I mean, did that have like any negative effects on your body at all?
Yeah, I had a lot of rib pain at the time. Breathing issues. It was definitely hard to breathe. I was constantly overheating, especially, you know, we live in California in the summer. It's like 100, and you know, you have like a whole extra layer that's compressing. Overheating was a huge issue.
It's the pits.
I know a few times I wore it for so long, what's the word? Not delusional, but like delirious. I was getting delirious because I was just tired and I was in a lot of pain, and yeah.
Did it affect your breathing?
It did, a bit.
Was it like properly fitted, or did you just where did you get it from?
I think I had one from like JC2B, I think was the brand, and there was like another brand like Underwire.
The more reputable brands.
Yes. Because my parents were like, oh, it's a reputable brand, right? But I think I ordered size too small on purpose, kind of thing. Or I'd outgrow it, and I ain't telling anybody about that. It's just like, keep it small, kind of thing.
I mean, did anybody tell you like binding isn't safe?
Yeah, my mom was constantly worried about it. I think that's part of the reason why they were so to let me have the mastectomy. It's like, well, we don't have to worry about issues, the complication of binding, if just get rid of them. Instead of like actually addressing the issue.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to find some kind of remedy. Like nobody explored like options with like different bras or anything like that. With like, like most girls, they're going through puberty. That's like a normal thing. I didn't get a whole lot of help. I was just like, here's some sports bras. Here's the Target section. I didn't really have much guidance. So, yeah.
What do you mean like you didn't have much guidance? Like even while you were a girl?
Yeah, I don't want to say I was. Sorry.
You're good.
I mean, it was a lot of things too. Like nobody really taught me how to do my hair. Like I couldn't even put up my own hair. Like that's part of the reason I think I finally just got it cut short is because all I knew how to do with it was pretty much just brush it out so it wasn't tangled. Like I couldn't tie it up or anything like that on my own. I always had to ask for someone to help me. Like nobody taught me how to do just simple stuff like that, It's just kind of basic quality of life as a woman.
I mean, but those things don't necessarily make you a girl, though. I mean, it's stuff that a lot of women do and know to do, but it's not what you do that makes you a woman. It's just something that you're born with.
Right, but it's just like it makes it more comfortable to like live a certain way. I'm not really sure. Like
just another one of those things that made you feel isolated.
Right, definitely. Yeah.
So, when was it that you started to feel like transition wasn't working out? And when you decide that you just couldn't do that anymore, that you needed to transition?
I was in denial about it for a really long time. I didn't want to admit it to myself. I went through a phase. I was like, maybe I'm just like non-binary and just gender non-conforming. And I kind of used that as like an space to experiment with like makeup because I got really into drag. I was like, the fancy makeup and everything. So I was like, cool, this is a way that I can explore makeup without it negating the effectiveness of my transition per se, because I was still a boy.
It's a weird sort of like cognitive dissonance.
It
and
really
like you
is.
realize like you miss a lot of things about being a woman and presenting yourself as such.
But no, it's
But
drag.
like you Sorry. What was that?
But I was like, but no, it's drag now. So it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's cross-dressing as your actual sex by some means. I mean, I totally went through the same thing. It's like it's kind of like the sunk cost fallacy in that like you've already invested into this, and like it's a huge investment that you feel like you can't really get out of, so you're just trying to make the best of it.
Right.
Is that how it felt?
Definitely.
Did you feel trapped like in your transition?
I think so for a minute, because I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to like disappoint everybody because it's like you put so much effort into taking me to these doctors and paying for everything, and and it just didn't help. So I really didn't want to like disappoint or let down, so to speak.
Yeah, it's hard. Like there's that shame around like being wrong in this decision that you've made for such a long time, and like getting everybody in your life involved in it. And on top of that, like, I mean, your family, I would imagine, was really involved in this. Like they were affirming you from the very beginning, and your parents were paying for all this and supporting you through it all. I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
Definitely. Yeah. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Did your medical transition coincide with your social detransition, or sorry, let me rephrase that. Did your medical detransition coincide with your social detransition, or did those happen at different points in time?
I would say those were a bit spaced apart. I kind of quietly went off the testosterone and quietly started spacing out the shots and going off of it. and not seeing those doctors, not taking the refills or anything. And it took a long time for me to actually socially like say something, be like, hey, we're changing the name and pronouns again. We're not, and actually say something.
I mean, how old were you?
It was recent, like a few months ago, like barely 18.
So just after your 18th birthday.
Yeah.
I mean, when you stopped asking for the refills, did your doctors like ask any questions about that? Like, did they ask why you were stopping?
I think I was like 17 when I stopped taking the refills.
Mm.
And I think they did try to call and like be like, hey, do you need an appointment? And I was like, no, I'm okay. And that was it.
Seems to be a pattern here.
Definitely.
So when did you actually tell the doctors and your family that you were stopping transition?
Honestly, to this day, I haven't like spoken to my doctors about that and actually said anything to them. Because I turned 18, so their pediatric doctors, there's not a point to reach out to them anyway. I'm sorry, when did I tell my parents? Or
Yeah, when did you tell your parents?
I think I told my parents when I was just after my 18th birthday. It was spaced around. It was very close. Yeah.
What did you tell them?
I'm trying to think how I kind of just dropped it kind of casually. I just kind of flippantly said something like, I'm switching it up. This is the name now, and that's what it is. And they're like, okay, I kind of figured because you look more feminine. And
so they kind of just understood what you were trying to do.
But it took a long time to make the switch.
It's a hard thing to admit. But so we haven't told your doctors yet. Have you experienced any complications from any of these procedures?
Yeah, I have some nerve issues from my double mastectomy.
How does that manifest?
Itchiness, but it's numb, so I can't feel it where I scratch, But the nerves are still just like.
Does it have that sort of electric feeling to it?
Yes.
As the nerves grow back?
Yes. I had that really, really bad at first, the first like year or two especially, and that was not something I was warned about. But yeah, even to this day, like I have nights where I just can't stop scratching myself, and it's just not, like it's gotten so bad it's gotten to the point where the scratching doesn't help. I've had to like,
I mean, have you told your doctors about that?
No.
Why is that? Do you feel like they're not gonna help?
I don't know what they can do about that, really, besides just tell me to wait it out and wait for it to pass. Maybe look into reconstruction, but I'm scared if I get reconstruction, the nerve issues might get worse.
I mean, it's a lot to take on. Like, did they ever tell you anything about, like, if you regretted this, that reconstruction was an option, or whether, like, what any of that would entail?
We never really went down that route with them. No, they never really talked about that with me. It was just kind of assumed as a definite, okay, you're forever going to live as a man now.
Yeah, I've noticed with a lot of these doctors, like, both from my own experience and from yours and from other detransitioners, like, these doctors, they'll not only present transition as the only path, they also treat it like it's not ever going to fail. Like, they never go into what stopping these treatments might look like, or what even detransitioning, like how likely that is to happen, or like the regret rates, or what life will look like afterward.
Right.
Did you even know that detransition was a thing?
Oh no. I didn't even hear about detransition until like lately, until I started detransition.
And when you started detransitioning, I mean, what was the response like from like your peers and from the trans community? Were you in contact with the trans community at this time?
Not really. I was very, very isolated. Um, but a lot of the messaging, like from like the few contacts I had, was kind of a you knew what you were getting into, or I got a lot of I told you so's, which just
It's a lot of gaslighting. Did anybody actually ever tell you so?
some people did, but it didn't really seem like it was out of a genuine place of concern. It's just oh, you're doing something stupid, and you're stupid, not a I'm concerned for you kind of thing.
It's very unsympathetic. But, I mean, did anybody press you into not detransitioning or try to tell you, like, you're imposing your own experiences on the trans community?
Uh, I'd say yeah, I've definitely been more pressured, at least to not talk about it. I feel like I've been very hushed. Um, you know, I've been told like, you're hurting actual trans people. It's like, was I not actually trans? I lived that whole experience.
Right, what's that supposed to mean?
Right, like I did the same treatments you did. Like, it's yeah.
At seemingly, I mean, according to the trans community, the most opportune time to do it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it still didn't work out. But since you were silenced by them, what was it that made you decide that you wanted to start speaking up about it?
It was seeing your story and that it happened to you by the same exact doctors.
That's
the
awesome.
same exact clinic.
I'm glad I could do that for you. But I mean, how did you come across my story in the first place?
Well, it was 4 a.m. one night. I couldn't sleep. I was on a spiral, and I was Googling my doctor's names and, Kaiser and the location. And the first thing to come up was like a My Doctor Online, like a review page, kind of like how they have review pages for like teachers and stuff, like professors, my professor. And I saw Dr. Watson's, and the first comment on her page was terrible doctor actively being sued by Chloe Cole. And the next thing I Google, Chloe Cole lawsuit, and then I see the letter intent to sue, and I read that in full. And then I got to the bottom, and then I saw the law firm, Harmeet, and I went to her website and immediately emailed.
That's incredible. So it was my story that made you reach out to Center for American Liberty and decide to pursue a lawsuit. I mean, what is it that you're hoping to get out of it?
I really want to set a better standard for care so that this doesn't keep happening. It's not that I want to erase this as an option. I just want to make sure that, checks and balances are there and doctors adequately assess patients before launching them into irreversible treatment, especially at such a young age.
Right.
I really just don't want to see this happen again.
Not to other kids and not to anybody who's vulnerable to this.
Right.
I mean, after you decided to team up with Harmeet, you had to announce on live TV that you're about to sue your providers. I mean, you didn't, it's not like you really had any previous experience with things like public speaking before. So how, you really just jumped into it. How was that?
I really did. I was pretty lucky that, people from Center American Liberty did help me a little bit and brief me and stuff like that. They did good prepping me for that. And it wasn't too scary, but it's definitely an experience.
They're good people.
Yeah.
They're good people, though. Harmeet's a badass. I'm glad you got her as a lawyer.
Appreciate it. I'm glad you do too.
What was it like being on the blockers?
Well, I essentially went through menopause at 12 years old. I had the whole hot flashes, everything. Like, the hot flashes were so intense. I would open the freezer and I'd stand in it and I'd try to shut the door on me as much as I could. And it was just a common thing in my household. Like, oh, he's having a hot flash again. It's just the blockers. Yeah. Um, the blockers also put a lot of weight on me too, and affected my mood very much. Like,
How long were you on them for?
I was on them, let's see, from November 2016 up until I'd been on the testosterone for a few months. I think I went off it around the time I had my surgery.
So it was about like roughly a year,
Roughly.
from 12 to 13. And what was it like when you started on testosterone?
Well, initially, the effects hit me pretty quick. My voice dropped. I started getting more body hair. I had a lot more energy. I wasn't like angry per se, but I had a lot more energy. Like I was bouncing off the walls, cleaning the ceiling, pretty much. Like it was insane. But yeah.
Did it affect you emotionally at all? Like, did it make it harder to process?
Oh,
like, your
definitely.
emotions?
I feel like it kind of almost numbed things. Like, I couldn't cry while I was on testosterone. Like, it physically was a lot harder to get the tears out.
And it probably wasn't as rewarding.
Definitely.
I remember I used to be, like, it would be harder to cry. And then when I did, I could do it for hours with no release. Was that how it was? And it really just adds on to all the distress you're going through with your previous like traumas and other comorbid issues that aren't being addressed. And so it really just piles on.
It really is just added fuel to a fire that's already going. Yeah.
It's a very descriptive way of putting it. I think it's pretty accurate. You feel like there's anything else that we haven't really touched upon?
Not really sure besides like, like some of the effects of the testosterone that still linger, like my voice, it's never gonna be the same. I have an Adam's apple. I'm not sure if it's gonna pick up on camera, but it is present. I do have one. And it's never gonna go away unless I literally get it shaved down like trans women do.
It's not too visible though. I don't think you'll ever have to do that, and really nobody has to do that. It's
really
a pretty rough thing to do.
Yeah.
It's terrible for your body. But I think you look just fine. You're a pretty girl.
I appreciate it. So are you. But yeah, there's just some things from testosterone that have definitely lingered. Just never gonna go away.
Any serious health issues?
I am like a lot more prone to like joint pain and like blowing out my back and like, like slipping things and stuff. I don't know if it could be related. It might not be. Not really sure. I think it might be though, because I'm still really young to be having those issues. But
there's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, definitely. There's just too many unknowns to be doing this so young without much guidance. Yeah.
But I mean, how are you doing now with all this and in your own life?
I've adjusted okay. Like I have a stable job, stable relationship with my family. It definitely could be a lot worse.
But I mean, do you have like any plans for the future?
Really honestly not sure.
There's a lot of possibilities. We're still pretty young.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of exciting though?
Scary.
I'd say it's a little bit of both. I'm really thankful that you came onto my channel today to talk about your experiences transitioning, and I think it was a great experience just listening to a story that really hits quite close to home. It's quite like mine, and
it's honestly cathartic. I appreciate you having me on.